Hello everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Information Governance Hot Topics for 2017. Before we get started, I would like to go over a few items so you know how to participate in today's event. You will have the opportunity to submit text questions to today's presenter by typing your questions into the question pane of the control panel. You may send in your questions at any time. We'll collect these and address them during the Q&A session at the end of today's presentation. The Principles Maturity Model is available for download in the handout pane of your control panel. You may download that at any time during the presentation. I would now like to introduce our presenter, David Vickers, Strategic Information Governance and Compliance Specialist for IDT. David?
Thanks, Janelle, and thanks to everyone who is in attendance today and taking time to join us for this. I wanted to go over the agenda so that you know kind of what we're going to be covering. The introductions Janelle just took care of, and we'll also be covering what is information governance, why should I be interested in information governance, the misconception of RIM and information governance. We'll cover what those true differences are, and then applying information governance, building a framework and applying that information governance within your organization. And then we're going to go into more detail of how, in applying this, why we need to create or do an assessment. Then we'll have time at the end for questions and answers. Again, if you have questions, feel free to text those or message those to Janelle, and we'll cover those at the end. Why partner with IDT? This is part of our introductions, and we feel like it's important that you know a little bit about our resume. IDT, founded 24 years ago. We're a consultative leader in governance, data management, system migrations, business process improvement, records management, and cloud-based application. We have a proven track record of successfully transforming business processes. And our mission is really to provide our customers with an ROI, that return on investment driven integrated solutions that are most cost effective and efficient for your organization. And everybody's companies are established and set up a little bit differently, and we have a good depth of knowledge as we have dealt with a variety of different relationships over the years. So I want you to think about, you know, what we're kind of looking for, and then, you know, some questions here. What is a good candidate for the IDT Information Governance Solutions? And then we'll cover some more of this in detail toward the end. But if you're in the midst of an ECM conversion or an upgrade, if you're looking at acquiring a new ERP system, or implementation conversion, or a upgrade. Maybe you're converting from a legacy conversion into an upgrade. Perhaps you know about information governance and you're trying to start your own program. You would be possibly a good candidate for a relationship with IDT. Perhaps you're trying to get a harness around big data as that grows. Maybe you're a small company and you're already experiencing big data. You know, how do I harness that and really leverage that to flush out more business? Or maybe you have a bunch of dark data out there that's out of control. You're trying to manage that, and we'll explain what dark data is if you're not familiar with that. Perhaps you have one of those high-value targeted departments that is in excessive litigation. That's another reason why you would want to engage IDT. Or you may be going from your network storage to a cloud provider. With today's cloud providers, that's another reason to look and measure, you know, how that information is going to be managed by the cloud provider. Or maybe it's a mergers and acquisitions. Our solutions are really developed in services to really assess where you are, help reduce those risks, and then flush out those savings. And we'll talk more about, in more detail, about our services here toward the end of this presentation. We also have partnered with ARMA International. If you're not familiar with ARMA's been around for 60 years. They are a premier nonprofit business association, almost 30,000 members in over 30 different countries. But ARMA, more importantly, is known worldwide for its standards and best practices, its guidelines for information management. And ARMA provides the educational opportunity, publications, and solid principles of records management and information governance. As Janelle mentioned earlier, there is a handout that you can download at any time during the presentation, and it is the ARMA International principles, known as the Generally Accepted Record-Keeping Principles and Information Governance Maturity Model. And this has been widely adopted by our courts here in the United States, Canada, the European Union, Asia, and others. It also has the Information Governance Maturity Model, and we're going to be talking more about this in our presentation today. But we're excited about our relationship with ARMA, who is known for, like I said, worldwide for their practices in education of good information management and handling practices. So what is information governance? Well, information governance, as Gartner Group describes it, is, and this is pretty detailed, so it's information governance is the specification of decision rights and accountability framework to ensure appropriate behavior in the valuation, creation, storage, use, archiving, and deletion of information. It includes the processes, roles, and policies, standards, and metrics that ensure the effective and efficient use of information and enabling an organization to achieve its goals. The graphic that you see here is a graphic from the IMRG, and it is a symbol of everyone, or usually multiple departments, that would be involved in an information governance program. It's not a single department. We usually find incorporated into this our legal department, our IT department, our records and information management department, and other departments throughout the business. Could be internal audit, operations, things like that. ARMA has a little more of an easier explanation of its role, its definition of information governance, and defines it as a strategic framework composed of the standards, processes, roles, and metrics that hold organizations and individuals accountable to create, organize, secure, maintain, use, and dispose of information in ways that align with and contribute to the organization's goals. If you think of it like this, information governance has to do with, the people, the policies, the procedures, and tools that are used within your company, and how well that information is managed through those entities. Why information governance? Well, information governance will help reduce risk. And risk reduction is important, especially if you are noticing excessive litigation. But there's also a cost savings area through efficiencies that are created by organizing information, records, things like that, but which also gives you a boost in productivity. And once it's organized, you'll notice that you can wrap some data into content analytics that will help you squeeze out and flush more profits to the bottom line, giving you another value for your business. At this time, I'd like to pass it back to Janelle for a quick poll question. And once you've taken this, I'll share with you a Forrester report so that you kind of see how you compare. Janelle?
Great. Thank you so much, David. So we're now going to take a brief pause for our first poll. So please select the appropriate answer and click Submit. We'll just wait a few more minutes to get those last-minute answers in. All right, so we're now going to be closing the poll, so any final answers, please submit them now. All right, terrific. David, I'll pass it back over to you.
Okay, so the poll question, thanks Janelle by the way, our poll question was, have you restructured or reorganized your records and information and or IT programs to support information governance strategy? So back in 2015, middle of the year, Army International did a joint survey with Forrester Research Group, and I just wanted to kind of share with you what the others were out throughout the country were, how they had responded to the same question. And as you can see, there's a large majority that have started restructuring. Almost 1/3. There's another 1/3 that no, they haven't, but they plan to within the next 12 months. The results of this, by the way, was not actually released until almost the end of the end of first quarter of 2016 this year. So this is still relatively fresh research data that we're dealing with here. So almost 60% either have started information governance or plan to within the next 6 months. So another reason we feel like information governance is relevant. Here are some reasons why we feel like it's here to stay. One is our CEOs and board of directors are being held accountable by the courts and by regulators. No more is it an excuse that a CEO or chief officer of the corporation can come into court and say, well, we didn't know we were supposed to do that. As a matter of fact, if you Google the name Judge Peck, he's a New York magistrate. You'll notice several hearings where companies have really got into a lot of trouble by using that excuse, and cost has been driven up in fines and additional litigation. But another reason information governance is here to stay is because of the explosion of big data. If you're not familiar what big data is, this is the information that through any Google Analytics or Yahoo Analytics, Facebook, but it could be also just the data that you're maintaining on customers. It could be credit card information. It could be customer buying habits. All of this is just adding up, and companies are finding it more difficult to get their arms around it and control this big data. ESI, electronically stored information, has been on a growth for the last 20 years, and it continues to double. If you've ever been subpoenaed, you probably have run into a need for e-discovery, which electronic discovery is become very, very popular, and it helps if you have your information more organized so that the e-discovery process can take place more efficiently. And then there's data breaches. I think we wake up almost on every morning or weekly and hear about another data breach. We've almost become numb to the news about data breaches. We can think of Target, and we can think of Home Depot and Anthem that have been some huge data breaches, but more and more small businesses are under attack. We'll talk some more about that. Social media, people in companies, CEOs really haven't thought of this, until just recently, when social media has become an item to be subpoenaed in court. And then, of course, the migration from our own network storage devices into the cloud presents new challenges for information governance and the need. Dark data. If we understand what dark data is, it's that information that we might have saved out on the network. We might have it throughout various silos. It could be on individual personal computers, laptops, But it's something that, we thought we might need, or we used it a lot, when we were actively engaging that information. But now it's been sitting up there for 10, 12 years, and we just haven't opened it up or looked at it. And, from an IT perspective, we can look at dates, we can look at when it was created, we can look at dates, and we can see that it's 20 years old. But truly, we don't know if that dark data is still a informational asset, or is it a liability? And a lot of companies have been caught with dark data that have become a liability. And then we've been able to show them if it is an asset, how do we leverage that asset so that we can, be more efficient, create more revenue for our company. Information as an asset should be leveraged for competitive advantage. And it gives us another reason why we feel like governance is that enterprise-wide concept. There's also been a lot of confusion about what information governance is. Hey, David, isn't information governance just the new name for records and information management? No, actually, it's not. Each has its role. Records and information management really is a mission-critical service for the organization, for the enterprise, for the company, because records and information management remains a mission-critical service with conflicts that can be checked and resolved throughout through the use of tools such as electronic content management, capture, and more, such as the physical records and the manual procedures that are created. And this really helps give stakeholders that 360-degree view into the processes and ensures that the company policies and procedures are being implemented. So if records run into problem areas and there's these checks and balances, well, then matters can be open for review, and then documents, records can be organized into file repositories, both in a physical or electronic sense. RIM also provides policy and procedure for this information and records throughout the life cycle, from the creation of the record, active processing of the record, version controls that happen over the period of time to ensure the integrity of the original document, and the retention and legal disposition of the document. And I say legal disposition because we can't legally destroy critical information unless we have a retention policy, a retention schedule. So what are some of the differences then between records and information management and information governance? Well, let's take a look at some of those. From a traditional RIM approach, it is operational, it's tactical, repeatable task often, and judgment and discernment from a very high level. Where from an information governance approach, it's more strategic, situational, compliance-oriented, and judgment and discernment from all levels, so from taking a more holistic approach. So what is a record? Well, traditionally, we have thought of records as maybe paper, microfilm, and even some may think of records also as electronic images. Well, these are all true today. We still deal with a lot of paper, and we still have a lot of microfilm. In some states, companies or government agencies are required still to maintain microfilm. But electronic content management systems, such as SharePoint and others, have become very popular recently. But today, we can also look at Word documents, Excel documents, PDFs. We can also look at text messaging. There's been a number of court cases involving text messages that have been subpoenaed. And then we've already touched a little bit about the social media from Facebook and Twitter, LinkedIn, things like that. So why should I care? I'm just a small business, you might say, and really this should only affect those big Fortune 500, 100 companies. Well, Recently, in a CNBC interview, Larry Panoman, the chairman of the research tank, indicated that really small businesses are now on the attack by the bad guys. Reason why they're on the attack is because often they are working with the large companies, and they have access to the large companies. If you remember the Target data breach back in 2013, few people may know this, but the company's vast database was actually hacked through its HVAC vendor. And that attack ended up costing Target over $39 million in settlements and affecting 40 million customers. Not to mention the reputation, of Target with its loyal customer base. But it's not just cyber attacks. I mean, we still see reports of companies that have dumped critical and confidential records into the dumpster. And you can Google medical records or confidential records found in dumpsters. There was in Ohio, there was recently, student records that also had HIPAA requirement information, their medical history on there, and their student records, social security numbers on. So this still happens today. These are all types of breaches of privacy that are going on in the company, and this one I still chuckle over, no pun intended, but the chicken farmer that was hired to shred confidential documents is probably one of my favorites. So let's look at some of the changes maybe over the last 10, 11 years. Back in 2005, records and information management critical issues we're dealing with RFID technology, some outsourcing, practice area development, electronic records management, content management, and electronic discovery as it was coming on board at that time. But today, the Records and Information Management Department are dealing with confidentiality, privacy, information security. They're constantly assessing their own department for remediation and understanding what the risk is. Cloud computing today represents some gaps in the way information management is handled. Not to mention mobile devices. Hopefully you have a bring your own device policy and procedure already in place, but a lot of companies don't and haven't addressed the mobile device. We've talked a little bit about big data and dark data. But also the social media governance, and then having a defensible disposition. You just can't go through and decide one day, oh my gosh, we got to get rid of all these documents. You could do that, but it's not the wise thing to do. And if you caught, the litigation consequences, can be stunning. Predictive coding is another thing that we see, records and information management dealing with, and in legal project management and change management. Change management has really become huge in the last couple of years. So as we look at it and compare these two, records management on one hand is systematic management of records and information throughout the life cycle. It includes analysis, it includes design, implementation, management of both manual and automated systems. Records management can be based on software applications, securing records, data, executing policies and retention. It really, from company to company, the duties of records management can often differ. It just depends on each company's strategy as it approaches records management. On the other hand, information governance, as we based on those definitions early on in the presentation, refers to the strategic element of designing and organizing information management. It's really that broad term that applies to the entire organization. We like to think of it as strategic and holistic. Records management represents the actual implementation of the information management plans. So, we believe that you can have a good information management department, but you cannot have information governance without information management. So they do play hand in hand, and they play very different roles within the company. Now with that, I'd like to pause just a moment again for another poll and turn this over to Janelle.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, David. So we're now going to take another brief pause for our second poll. So again, just please select the appropriate response and click Submit. And we're just going to wait a few moments more to get those last-minute votes in. All right, we'll now be closing the poll. David, I'll turn it back over to you.
All right, thanks, Janelle. So let's look at how, and again, we're not going to share your information publicly in this. You know how you voted within this poll, but I'd like to just share this to see, so that you can see what others, throughout the United States, how they polled in that. And what's important about this slide, as I've looked at this information, over the course of the last 5 to 10 years, when Arma and Forrester did this, and we were reviewing this information, I thought it was very interesting that within the last 5 to 10 years, there's been a major shift of records and information management and who they report to, because the majority of them are now coming under either the IT area or the legal area. And again, it depends on each corporate structure and what their strategies are. Often we find that compliance also reports to legal. You'll notice those IT and legal happen to be the top, in the top. I don't look at other at this point. Other could be, hundreds of different variables in that. But, when isolating this out, a good move of, the department structure, to IT and legal, which also can represent new questions. I'm the director of IT. How do I deal with records and information management? I think I know what I'm doing here, but I don't understand all the policies and procedures maybe, or all the things that go through on a day-to-day basis. So there may be some educational opportunities there. Same thing, with records and information management, that's been put under, underneath legal. They may not understand, what goes on underneath, around that table all the time. So there may, again, be educational opportunities within those areas and understanding how to effectively communicate. So I just thought this was pretty interesting here. So on to where do I start? Or maybe you already have an information governance program that you've started. How do I measure that to know if I'm being successful within my own current information governance program? So I want to go through these next few slides, and we don't have much more left here, but I want to go through some of the basics of a framework, building that corporate framework, and we're going to talk a little bit about this. And this may not be all-inclusive, but it's a good place to start. And if you've already got an IG program going, you may see that I've left some of these off. Those are always open for discussion. It's going to vary from company to company. But one of the first steps we need to take is inventory our corporate assets, understanding what those assets are. That could be like confidential client information, credit card information, applications, medical records, any personal information, both on my customers or even on my employees. Understanding what our intellectual properties are, our trade secrets, what are the different documents that we have on those things, those items on IP and trade secrets, and then what policies and procedures we have in place. Next, we want to look at the risk of data breach. These could be external threats, it could be internal threats. Many of the data breaches happen because of internal threats. We'll talk a little bit more about that here in a couple of slides. But IT departments overall, within the last 5 to 10 years, have done a good job of trying to put up those roadblocks for those external threats. Could be dispersion, third-party providers. We talked about cloud providers. And I also mentioned, that Target's breach came as a result of their HVAC vendor. These are all considerations when it comes to the risk of data breach. And this bullet point should probably be at the very top, because I feel very strongly this is the majority of the data breaches came as a result of the lack of employee training. We all may experience some turnover, more than, some maybe more than others, but employee training is not today a one-time training. It's got to be a repetitive, over and over type of training to reinforce the company's policies and procedures as it relates to our network integrity, our credentialing integrity. And then also software tools that add to leaks. And if you followed the Microsoft versus Russia news at all, you may be aware of that. Russia has kicked Microsoft out because it felt like that through a leak of the within Office through Microsoft, there was some manipulation of their elections. So now Russia has kicked Microsoft out, and they've created their own competitive product, and they're trying to eliminate all Microsoft Office and operating system products within their offices within the Russian government. So some steps that we can take to protect us against loss: stronger security infrastructure and robust policies, those procedures. And we need to assess. We need to assess these policies, procedures, and our infrastructure, our people, to help identify gaps in those areas. And by doing all of these things, though, we have to have, as a company, the sponsorship at the highest level. That means from our CEOs, our senior level executives. When the courts, if you get into a triggered event, the first thing the court's going to want to know, it was the CEO, the board of directors, were they promoting good information management practices from the top down? Regulators, when they come in, they're doing an audit. That's one of the first things they want to know. Is sponsorship of good information management practices, coming from the top down. And then constant awareness is another step. We talked about the employee in the previous slide, but constant awareness of that. And then once we've taken some of these steps, we need to audit. We need attestation to identify if we are following through. Are we implementing this procedure, these policies, the tools that we're using? So once we have some of these things in place, we can start to take those steps to applying information governance. And it really stems from the core of our information governance program, and that's records and information management. You need to have that, that whether it's dispersed across multiple departments, or you have a centralized records and information management team within your organization. That's the core piece. You need to form that information governance team, and we talked about Gartner's definition, and we had that graph. But who needs to be around the table as we discuss this holistic approach to how we're going to manage information? Obviously, we're going to need our team from RIM. We're going to need our team from IT. We're going to need our team from legal, from our general counsel. We're going to, if you have internal audit, you're probably going to need them involved as well. Operations and compliance, and it's going to vary from company to company. And most importantly, when we're taking steps to apply information governance, we've got to know, where are we? Many companies have taken on information governance programs, but they never took a baseline of where they were and did had a proper assessment, identifying their policies, their procedures. What are people thinking when it comes to handling information management? And then once we have assessed our current situation, analyze these results. We call it gap analysis, but identifying where we're where we are very mature or where we may be immature, in our approach to good information governance. Once we have that, then we can look at establishing some goals. There may be some departments that may not be that mature in information management practices and in governance. And that may be okay because there's not that big of a return on investment for that. But there may be others that are maybe high-value targeted departments that are in excessive litigation that through establishing some goals, and it could be just a couple of policies, it could be some training, it could be some tools that we could add in there that would create create a better environment and help mitigate some of that litigation, saving the corporation literally hundreds of thousands of dollars. Once we have these goals, then we can build our roadmap. We know these are the corrective actions, this is the remediation that we're going to take, and then once we've completed those actions and remediation, go into training and train our people on what does this mean, and make sure that we constantly are training them. And then after all of that, we go back and we assess again and see if we're making some improvement. So some important things about an assessment, it just helps us set specific and quantifiable goals. It really helps us to understand what our current state is, and then it monitors our progress toward these goals and helps demonstrate and improve objectivity. Because when we go in and we start to assess a program for improvement, we can establish a baseline performance. And today, just about in anything you do, you can establish a baseline. Even in the NFL, they'll take their players, and pretty much in any college sports and now in even high school sports, they take their players and they establish a health baseline, so that if they get involved into a concussion, they can take them, run their assessment on the player, and identify where they were at the original state and where they are now. Are they suffering from a concussion? And if they maintain their baseline, then they are back in the game. We need to do that in our own companies today. That, by assessing, we can establish those baselines. We can identify our deficiency areas within our departments, understanding what those risks are, and really demonstrate through the assessment as we make these improvements the impact of the program and how we can, it's paying for itself. Demonstrating the control of our informational assets. Now, one of the reasons we partnered with ARMA is because of the generally accepted record-keeping principles, and I hope that you will take time to download the handout we have today. It goes into much more detail about the principles, but there's 8 of them, and there's simple 8 principles, and most of this should be common sense, but I'm still stunned today that a lot of companies, not just companies, if you remember the definition of information governance from the ARMA's perspective, it's not just our senior leaders, our senior executives of the corporation, it's the individuals and their understanding of what their role is within the organization. So accountability has to do really with that top down that we talked about earlier. Transparency, visibility into our processes. Do we have our processes documented? What are those procedures for that? The principle of integrity. This has, in my mind, a lot to do with version control, but when we're dealing with contracts and content, information documents, are we dealing with that one source of truth, that original document that we all agreed upon? Now, it might take, several different versions to get to that, but what is that document? Where is it? How do I get my hands on that document that we all agreed upon, that we signed up on? The principle of protection. Are we restricting our associates from information that they have no access to? In other words, if I have medical information or customer credit card information, I don't want everybody to have access to that information. So proper protection. Compliance. Are we up to speed on the latest regulations? what do I have someone that's responsible for this area? And I will dare say that after the latest national elections, our compliance needs are going to change, and hopefully they'll be reduced with we'll see a reduction in regulations. So this is really important within the next 4 to 8 years of understanding compliance and the compliance landscape and how those things are changing. Availability, having the right information to the right person at the right time, provides good customer service, but it also helps expedite the subpoena or the e-discovery process as well, or the regulators or auditors. Lord knows you don't want auditors in 12 months out of the year, but if we have the information available, it helps expedite getting them in and out. These last two are tied pretty closely together, retention and disposition. And often people are confused by what is retention or disposition, unless they are, by definition of the records and information management type character. Because disposition is, let's face it, that's getting rid of the information we don't need. And defensible disposition, the legal course of getting rid of that information, cannot happen without the retention. And often we find companies that have a retention schedule, but they haven't updated it in over 20 years. Well, the inventory of content, the inventory of documents certainly change much quicker than every 20 years. So these are just fine principles that we feel like every company should at least adopt to help manage their organization. And these principles have been adopted by our courts, by our regulators, and it's one of the reasons why we're excited about this partnership with ARMA. Now, okay, let's say I'm adopting those principles. Hey, that sounds pretty good. But now we need a metric. We need a metric to measure how well we're doing against these principles within our enterprise. So ARMA introduced an information governance maturity model. And this is where you do not want to be number one. Number one is a substandard class in the ARMA International Information Governance Maturity Model. And number 5, I have rarely seen, but it has happened, is transformational. That means everything is like informational heaven, We have all these policies and everybody understands every sentence of our policy and follows those procedures to the T, and no one ever, fails short of, following these policies. All of our tools are constantly working in perfect harmony, along with all of our backups that never fail. This is a transformational. But most companies struggle to try to be a 2 or a 3. And 3 is a really good place you want to be. 3 means I am meeting all the essential levels of all the regulatory compliance laws, local, state, and federal, that apply to my company. So if I can meet a 3 in scoring against the 8 principles of the generally accepted record-keeping principles, overall, as a company, I'm doing really good. So I'm going to turn it back over to Janelle, but these are, as I do that, I'm just going to share with you, the reason that we assess is to understand, again, where we are today, and we assess based upon the 8 principles that ARMA created, about 7 or 8 years ago, and we assess those principles based upon the information governance maturity model to identify those gaps within your organization. And with that said, Janelle, let me turn it over to you for our last poll question of the presentation.
Great, thank you, David. So we're going to launch our 3rd and final poll. So we'll keep this open for a few moments to allow for all of your votes. All right, so we'll just keep this open for a few moments more. Okay, perfect. David, I'm going to turn it back over to you.
All right, thanks, Janelle. All right, so again, you know how you answered. So let me share with you what the Forrester research and the ARMA International survey indicated. So out of including the requirements, definitions, and vendor selection, are records management stakeholders. And again, this could be a centralized department, or it could be dispersed throughout the enterprise. Were those stakeholders included in the IT strategic planning at your company? And this has been a big change too within the last 10 years. Used to, they were never consulted. They were never asked. But today, now almost 60% are being included. So this is another big telltale sign that information governance is, you see this big shift, toward this holistic approach of information governance throughout our organization. So to close down here, what we're going to share with you as far as some information governance assessment services provided by IDT. A lot of times the hurdles to hop over is, how do I form a team and who needs to be on that team? This is something that IDT can help you with. Another roadblock we find is identifying who the key stakeholders are that we need to assess. Well, this all could be, there could be many variables depending on the scope of work that you are engaging for an initial assessment. And often, and we'll get into more detail in an upcoming webinar, but often, a company will start out with, kind of at that 50,000-foot assessment, and then they'll come back in and they'll dive in for that 20,000-foot assessment, getting more in-depth detail. But it also depends on what the situation is. Maybe they've had a triggered event. A triggered event meaning they've received a subpoena, and the court is ordering them to understand where they are and to turn over this information and how they've been managing and what their information management practices are. So again, it all depends on the scope of what the initial assessment needs to be. It could be enterprise-wide. It could be focused on those high-value targeted departments, but we can assist in that in helping you with your stakeholders. The other thing is, the best kind of assessment is one that's facilitated by a subject matter expert. And we have the resources here at IDT to help you with that and to expedite getting this assessment completed and the gap reports prepared and getting that analysis back to you and helping guide you through that. Not everybody understands what baseball stats are, and sometimes I need a statistician, to help me relate that back to, my baseball players that I may have on my fantasy team, and IDT can provide you with the same, reports and help you understand what that report means. Once we have that, then we can also help recommend the remediation and, understanding, how to build, what our goals are going to be for that remediation, identifying the areas that we want to target at first, and then, creating our roadmap. And sometimes this happens over a long course period of time. I know of several companies that, turning their information governance around did not happen overnight. It was a process. And IDT can be there every step of the way, or we can help, transfer our knowledge over to you so that you can help guide yourself through that as well. Again, we shared this at the beginning. Who is a good candidate? Think of these things. This is just a few bullet points. The one I didn't put on here, because I don't think any of us are in litigation today, or we haven't received a subpoena today, or knock on wood, I hope we haven't. But that is by far the jumping into point for most companies. They've been served a subpoena and they don't know where to start. Engage us here at IDT and let us help. With that being said, Janelle, I'm going to turn it over to you for any questions that might have popped up throughout the presentation. And again, thank you everybody for joining me here today.
Okay, perfect. Well, thank you, David. So now we're going to begin collecting some of the questions that were submitted during today's presentation. As a reminder, you can still submit questions during the question pane. David, our first question is, how long does it take to complete an assessment?
Oh, sorry, Janelle, I muted myself. A great question, and there is so many variables in this. Again, going back to that scope of work, and what your initial intent is of the assessment. This could be, in a proactive approach. This could be done within, a month or two, or I've seen in one situation with a well-known billionaire that lives in Nebraska, where we went into one of his companies to do this. We were in and out within a week. We had the information that we needed to discern where they were. We came back within a couple of weeks and were able to present them with a deliverable document that identified the gaps and recommended remediation. And then it could, depending on how many departments, how many stakeholders are we talking about, all of those are the variables. So it could take, as little as a few weeks to do an assessment, could take a few months. Again, those are some of the variables to think about. If you're interested in learning more, engage with us in a discussion so that we can understand what, and maybe help guide you as to what would be a good starting point for you.
Okay, terrific. Thank you, David. So we've got a few more coming in. Second question, David, is our company also has offices in other countries. How would you facilitate them?
Okay, great question. We've had this situation before. One of the best ways to do that is through the same technology that we're using today, through the GoToMeeting, and often, often it's not cost feasible for the company to send us for a one-on-one meeting with them. But we have tools in place that are deployed throughout the web in a secured environment that, even if we are assessing someone overseas, that we also have now restrictions of where that data has to reside. So through some tools that we use, any information or questions that we might pose, their answers are actually meeting the requirements of their country, whether that be in the European Union or Canada. And often we'll have discussions through Skype or through GoToMeeting, things like that, to deploy. We've also used that same approach where we have multiple locations throughout the United States. There's only a few times that we've actually had to go on site, and that was because the company wanted us to be there. So it just varies.
Sure. Great. Thank you, David. So it looks like a third and final question, which is, I don't see our senior executives taking time for something like this. How do you go about getting them involved for an assessment?
Yeah. Senior executives do not want to spend time on this, but it goes back to that sponsorship at the highest level. If they understand that, the importance of it, and most do, and legal counsel, general counsel within the organization, they help the CEOs understand that, especially in law firms. I don't know if we have any law firms joining us today, but senior partners, if they're not billing time, they don't want to spend time on anything other than that. So we have strategies, we have techniques we use, and we break it up so that we can go in. We schedule a 15, 20-minute meeting with them. We get as many questions as we can, and we do this until we have all of our questions answered. And that seems to be more reasonable to do it.
Okay, well, wonderful. David, I think that concludes our question and answer. I want to thank you, David, and thank everyone for attending today's webinar, Information Governance Hot Topics for 2017. So if you have any other questions, please contact David Vickers. You'll be emailed his contact info at the end of this presentation. You'll also receive a follow-up email within 24 to 48 hours with a link to view a recording of today's webinar. So on behalf of IDT and our presenters, thank you for joining us and have a great rest of your day.